hello everybody. I'll just admit the people coming in. This is our third run of this. Somebody's saying there's no audio. I know there's audio because I've been speaking with other people here. So Benno, you should try to check your equipment. I'm sure that other people can hear me. I know that my co-host, who will be Detlef Overbeek, he will be showing in a moment. I have heard you, Benno. So, did you respond that you did not hear me, or did you respond that you hear me?
Funny.
That's good. Okay, it seems that we've got people hearing. Yeah. Well, I'm going to present Detlef. He will. He's the editor of Blaise Pascal Magazine, and he's one of my good friends. And he's been invited and agreed to show some stuff of what he's doing. And he has decided. And since all this presentation is is free, what people want to show, he decided to show how to work with KPM table in Delphi, and also how to use it in Lazarus. So that's going to be an interesting show where we're going to see Lazarus in play also. And afterwards, I think he will also have a small chat about Blaise Pascal Magazine and some other exciting things that's going on. And I'll just bring it over to you, Detlef, and you can start showing off, and then I'll after your show, I will show a few things about my SmartBinding. So you can share your screen.
Especially because I'm nowadays into Lazarus working. And I also did a special thing, which is what I will start with is the memtable, how to install and how to do that under Delphi. And after that, I'll show how to do that under Lazarus, which is quite different. Because I'm the editor of Blaise Pascal Magazine, I personally have experienced the difficulty of explaining programming material to anyone, especially because we are all beginners, all starters, when we never before used that piece of source code or program. At least that's my experience. I found reading install instructions is a science in itself. Very often, you need to try to understand what is written, and sometimes the text is so compact and so difficult to read that you will have to reread it several times. In this case, I want to show three things, which is first of all the install moment, where to get all you need. Second is install it, in this case in Delphi and in Lazarus. And for those who never used Lazarus, how easy it can be done. And then find the trouble. There is always something wrong or misunderstood. And something not to forget is how to uninstall stuff. I have prepared several programs for Lazarus that I will show as well. And I now want to show, first of all, where you have to go to if you go to maybe it's not necessary to do that. But anyway, you have to download your stuff from components for developers. And you need, of course, to have a login, etc., etc. And I'm not sure what kind of version you have. You have to keep in mind that, especially if you installed it for Delphi, the license you get is not only for once. If ever after you want to update or have an update or prolong the license number will still be the same. I think this is something that Embarcadero has learned now, because they have given me one license for everything. So that's a very good idea. Whatever you're doing by installing this mem table, or even the larger suite of enterprise, you need to uninstall whatever you have from older versions first. If you don't have that, that's no problem. But if you do have that, please do uninstall it. I have prepared a special document for you, which is a PDF you can download later on. So you'll have the whole session complete. And there is extensively written about the several steps of installing stuff, etc. I standard use the directory of KBM memtable, which is normally advised. I do that because whenever you start something new, my experience is that it is better to follow the simple instructions and do later on something more difficult, maybe put it or reinstall it into a different disk or whatever you want, but not the first time. The first time you must make connection, and I think it's far easier to do that. There's going to be a directory on C, which is called KBM memtable. I have a very large screen normally, so I have to switch now and then. What do I want to show? Can I go further up? Down. Where is it? Lazarus. Ah, here it is. So if you go to your local disk, you'll see the installed directory. And before all, some things you should know. The installation text is needed to be written, read, I mean. And if you open it, you will see that you have, as a version, Red Studio 10.1 Berlin and lower, etc. It goes all along down there. You should be able to translate that, because Berlin is nowadays Rio and it's version 10.3, and it works perfectly well.
I think it should be updated, but I might have forgotten it.
That's not meant as a critic.
No, but it's good you're mentioning it.
Yeah. And after that, you can carefully read what is of your interest, down here there is a Lazarus with Free Pascal 2.6 or newer. We will make use of that. The problem is that the numbers are, of course, not very much updated, but it says or newer, so I think that everybody does understand it. I'll come back to that later. If you go for this special text where you have licenses, etc., you can see that there is a help file. It has quite long passwords, etc. This is something you should keep in mind, that you never lose it, because it will be very difficult to, or giving a lot of trouble to find or register again, etc. This is a document you should keep safely at a certain place where you can never find it. Okay, I think this is enough. The directory, what it is all about. I'm not talking about demos or documentations, etc. That's not very much interesting for the moment. The source. In the source, there is all the stuff available. You can see the Delphi 10.3, which is what we need, but don't click on it, because if you go to somewhere and you want to install it, you will have to find the KBMM design time. This is for C, but you need to have it for Delphi, so it's D. And you could use this one. I have been using the Pro package, and that's what you need to install into Delphi. And there is also a design time package. Did I say design time? Yeah, there is also a Pro package. A runtime, I mean. Yes, you can see that here. Those are the two you need to install. And after that, it is quite easy. But I'll show you some tricks if you don't know them already. Let's try to find out how to register the packages quite well.
Can I just interrupt a moment?
Yeah.
Because Benno, he asked if the memtable professional edition is available outside KBMW. And no, it's not available outside KBMW. It's bundled with KBMW Pro and Enterprise Edition. But this installation procedure is exactly the same when you're installing standard edition of KBM memtable. So regardless if you are using a standard edition or professional edition of the memtable, then you can follow the same procedure as Detlef is explaining.
Okay, I'll have to start Delphi, if I can find it. Oops, here it is. And what surprised me very much is afterwards, it's always very simple to get it done, but you first need to find it. After you've installed everything, you should, let me just, new file, new, do a simple unit. Okay. I don't want to show anything like a project over here, because everybody is used to Delphi. except that I found it very difficult to find the library path. I was surprised how it was set under a very long list, and I think it's put at a very difficult place. You can't find it over here, but you can find it by ticking in your name, not your name, but the name library. And you can go there, and then you're immediately there. And at the left, you suddenly see under language, Delphi options, there is the library hidden. I was very surprised because of that. I've been looking quite intensively to find that. Now, all you need to do is add to the browsing path and the library path. And if you do so, you can find the path, which I already installed, of course, but you can add it, and if you put it here, you could delete it and do it again. Anyway, that is quite clear to anyone, I suppose. Okay. This is all about Delphi, what I wanted to show you, because I did the main part in Lazarus. So let's switch to Lazarus. Lazarus has quite a different approach. I first of all need to show you where you can find here. Where you can find all the documentation. And we have to do something special here because it wasn't yet prepared to, and I tested it, so I also corrected the problems that were in there. And Matthias Gärtner, who is the guy who does the IDE for Lazarus, helped me with this one. So you go to source in your memtable project. After that, you will see that there is a, is it name date modified? It should be, yeah. Here we have the runtime Lazarus standard LPK. The LPK package is the package you need to install in Lazarus. There is also a design time package, but the problem is that that wasn't at the right place and gave some problems during installation or compiling, let's say it like that. So I had to make a special directory. I called it Lazarus Design. You can call it whatever you want, as long as you use it as a separate thing. And in there need to be these files available. And you see here is the same sort of thing, but the design time Lazarus standard LPK package. And it needs the pass files and the resource file. So I think when you install it, you best do it like this. The name of the directory is not important, but you could call it test or whatever. And this lib file directory will be created by Lazarus itself. There are some files in it, as you see, and we will need that, but you don't have to create it because it's simple. This directory that you need with those files that come out of this list below here, and in the document they are all listed so you can find them. It's very easy to install, so let's go to install it to Lazarus. I'll do that live. I've tried to do it 3 times, so it should work, I hope. First of all, as you can see, I have here a Lazarus version, which is 2.0.4. That is the normal Lazarus version. In that version, I created a project, which we can talk about after we have installed stuff. So I'll come back to that, just to show you. How do I get that?
What are you looking for?
The project form. I can't see it. It's too small. View. Funny.
Probably behind something, because I can see there's something behind.
Can I?
If you remove the source editor window, not remove
This
it,
maybe
move it
this
away.
is mentioned. Sorry?
If you move the source editor away, then I think, wasn't there something behind? No, there's just a message window. Okay.
No, that's just the message window.
Isn't there a Windows arrange thing?
Yeah. Source double comment.
You might find if you go to the left property of your form, you can just set it to 0. It might be that it's off the actual screen.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Unit. Well, let's do that later. It's not interesting for the moment. We'll do that afterwards. I have also a 2.1.0 version, which is a trunk version. If you create a trunk version, you'll have an extra version where you can work with, because it's always the very newest, but in that case, it's if you need to install or do something, you might be surprised, because sometimes they make an update that is not good enough and they have to redo it again, etc. So for safe cases, it's better to have the normal version 2.04, and this is the 2.1 version. I made also a community version, and that is just the same. It's also a trunk version, but I always make that available for anybody who wants to download it and doesn't want to have go to all the trouble to install things, etc. You can find it on the website. I'll talk about that later. Now, for the moment, I'll start 2.1. As you can see here, there is no KBMW. I'll move this aside. If you go to package and you want to install, it's not new package, but you want to open a package. If you go to new package, you will create a new package. Open package file, and that's very simple. It automatically goes to the last source we had, but I need the other one first, which is described in your in your file. So you need to install first the memrun las LPK. Open. This is a bit big. Can I make it smaller? Like that. And what you need to do here now is simply compile it. And the first error. Now that has something to do with a very easy to solve problem, but it's still a problem of Windows. Windows doesn't allow you to create temp files without having administrator rights. So I have to abort. Try that again. No, I won't change. And then, come on. Now I click on the shortcut and run as administrator. Takes a while, it's Windows. Show more details, yes. And there is just the same form, etc. We have to do that again, so we'll do open package file. Go to the run. Remember, the runtime version needs to be installed first. Or it's not going to be installed, it's going to be compiled. You open it, and now you say compile. And I hope I can show you something happening. Yeah, over here. So it's ready. And for now, we go to the next package we want to install. Do that again. Now we go to the directory we created. Pick the design time Lazarus standard package. Open it. I see something going on here. No clue what that is, just a moment. I'll go back. In these cases, usually I try to build Lazarus again.
But what was the problem, Detlef?
I haven't seen this before.
Okay, but it's just because we didn't see any problem as such.
No, so there is no problem. There is some line. Maybe I stopped it too early. Anyway, we have it now, and we do that again. I go to package, APK, and we are in the Lazarus design time. open. And now we should be able to simply install. Installing the package, etc., will automatically install these packages. And you see the run Lazarus standard package will be compiled. Do you want to rebuild? Well, if I don't, I get nothing, so I have to. And there it is. It will start again in a few seconds. Save change files. No, I'm not interested. Oh yeah, that's a matter of advice. No, I must explain first something. If you run packages in Lazarus, you must remember that there is always a project open in Lazarus. You cannot run Lazarus without having a running project. Because of that, if you want to protect your eventually opened project, you best do each time new project, application, or a simple program, whatever you want to do, something that cannot harm anything. You do it like this. Now, what you will see is that you have here a new tab, which is called memtable. And there they are. The memtable itself, this is a stream format, and this is CSV format. And this is the SQL table. And that makes the whole thing very interesting because this is a sort of client data set that is capable of using SQL, the only one in the world I know. And I'm very fond of it. Well, actually, this is all we had to do. And now I will show you something about how we do that, how we can uninstall things. I don't need to have it right now in here, so I will uninstall it here in two different ways. There are two possible ways to uninstall. So you go to Package, Install, Uninstall, and then you will find the KBM Mem Design LAS standard. If you select that and uninstall it, you click on Uninstall Selection, and then let me see if I can enlarge this. And you would say uninstall selection, then comes save and rebuild or save and exit. There is another way as well, which is just as easy. If you go to Package and go to Recent Packages, which you can see, Lazarus Design Time Package, you simply go there, get again the package editor, and now there are here possibilities to install and uninstall. So you simply say uninstall, yes. Do you want to rebuild? Well, the rest of it.
But there's something logically wrong there, Detlef.
Sorry?
There's something logically wrong there, Detlef. Why would people want to uninstall the memtable?
Yeah. Because they have plenty of them. I've got them in all three versions, so that's not necessary. You see that it is not anymore available over here. And I've done it now today for 4 times, and so it's quite safe to do it in the way I described. Now I'll go over to the program, a very small program I created with all. Can I find it? Let me see. F12. Properties, T-form. Left. Would this be? Yeah. Thanks for the help, whoever it was. I didn't think of that. I usually don't have to. What I actually did here is, as you all know probably, I put a data source on it, a mem table itself, a stream, CSV, etc., the SQL, an open dialog, and a save dialog. And I will finalize this program so it works properly for you all. I'll show you what I've done. If you say open file, it's nothing but open dialog, load from file. And if you go to save file, it is save dialog, execute, post, save to file, etc. There is one little thing more which might be interesting to you. I'm very fond of knowing where my project comes from, because nowadays you very often have a number of disks, and it's rather easy to know where the path is. And I also put in the compile date, because I then know what kind of version it is that I'm compiling, because there might be several, and then it could be a very old one. I'll just run it. I was busy on creating a close action, but you see what I did is do on create file, load something that I already created, and it's very simple. You change the file, the affix, typically Dutch or German, and here, oh, that is a famous poet I know from Germany. You can, of course, normally save it as I did here, and or save file, and that's it. You go to the registration, and the fun of the thing is that I created here the Detlef memtable.mem. You can make any extension that you want. So that's all. Let's say save. Close it. And run it again. And as you see, this is done automatically. I will create something extra in this small program. I need to stop it. I need to create something extra because I want to make a conversion between CDS files from Delphi into memtable files. And the only way to do that is save it as a CDS, comma separated file. And you can write that into the, read that into the memtable. So you can switch to whatever sort of information you want. Is there anybody that I need to explain how to use the memtable itself?
If anybody wants to chime in, you can just unmute, or I can put a chat.
Sorry?
I'm just saying to everybody that they can just unmute if they want to say something or ask something, or they can click on the chat icon.
Nobody wants to know anything?
It's a bunch of knowing people.
Okay, so everybody knows how to create fields and stuff like that in memtable, I suppose. Okay, this is all for now, what I wanted to explain to you. I think it's very easy to use it in Lazarus. Are there people that want to know more about Lazarus? In case you want to create anything, it's you need to create a new project, or at least open it, or find your project, etc. That is, I could explain all that, but I'm not sure if people are interested in it. So I'll go to the next thing I wanted to show you. Let's see, install. Yes, I would like to tell you something about the special event, but before, if anybody wants to have this project as an example, encoder, etc., as well as having the PDF that is prepared for this, just ask him and I will make sure you get it.
Thank you,
Sorry?
I'm just saying thank you. I'll make sure
Okay.
that happens.
We created a special event on 29th and 30th of November. And that is a very special event. We have done quite some very important things with Lazarus. Nowadays, we have even WebAssembly in Lazarus, and today I had the latest update. In the next issue of Blaise Pascal Magazine, there will be a lot written about that, and on that day we will show quite a lot of things about this. I'll read out for you some things that you might want to know. For reservations, you go to professionals, Lazarus Factory, but you can also go to the Blaise Pascal Magazine website, which probably everybody knows.
Otherwise, you can perhaps show them on the screen.
Yeah, I'll just get rid of this. Let's go to... Oh no, that's not meant. Whoa, I never saw this so large. This is funny. This is the latest news I put on the web. It's an international event. All is spoken English as well as German if necessary. And of course, our Dutch friends will be available as well. It's on Friday and Saturday, 30th of November. And if you click on this, you can go here, and then you can see some of the interior, etc. I will work on this because we just agreed yesterday to create this event. It will be done in Eindhoven at Abo's place. He has a very large well, kind of factory over there, where he has all the needs for us to be seated and to receive guests, etc. Material is all available, and we can have up to 150 people. I have here the details, etc., but you can find it on the website, so I won't go on with this. I can give you some idea of the program that will be done on that day, the first day, which is the 29th of November. Holger Klemt from IB Experts will show how to use Lazarus in combination with databases, especially with Firebird. He will create a program with Pastor.js, so not with WebCore, but with Pastor.js, which is simply Lazarus. And later we will add TMS WebCore, another program, and those programs will be created there. And you can, if you have your laptop or whatever with you, you can follow what is done there. Then we will present WebCore 3. It will be available as trial version, the so-called PGO files, and that is a trial version of TMS WebCore. And that is for under Lazarus. It is as well under Delphi as Lazarus, and will be the same. And I spoke to Bruno about this, and probably by that time, all the examples he has made for Delphi will be available for Lazarus by then as well. So that's a very good thing. Matthias Gärtner will give an introduction of the latest version of Lazarus. We strive to have the latest version available at that moment. And there will be quite a number of people from our team, so we can answer your questions. Then we strive to let you have 2 working programs at the end of the day. And that means that, as far as I understood from Holger, that you will have at least our registration file that works on your smartphone. And Matthias will tell quite something about Lazarus working on Mac. And we strive to have it WebCore 3 available for the Mac as well. Linux is already working, but we hope that will be done by that time as well. We also hope by then to have the latest news about the Lazarus handbook. We are very hard working on it to get it done, but nowadays it's 720 pages. I think there are coming another 200 pages as well, and I hope to get it done before that time. Then there will be a session about WebAssembly, and that will explain what is WebAssembly, how to use it, and we'll create a small program with it. At the moment, you can find at the website some documentation about it, and there is a live program that you might try out, and that is done with WebAssembly. On the second day, there is a documentation by Anthony Vogelaar. Some people will know him. Anthony will show the connection of Bluetooth over the internet. That means that you can, let's say, be in Holland and speak over Bluetooth, and then find the text available on a, what's it called, Android phone, and you can read the document from there by Bluetooth. So wherever you are in the world, you can use that. And we have made it available for Pastor.js, and it will come available for TMS WebCore as well. Then later in the afternoon, I think, Bruno will be available. He has some special things to say. There is news about the version 3, and he has some very hot items he cannot make available now because some things are very, very secret. They first want to finalize it before they can show it, but it will be shown then. And I'm quite sure that it will be really something enormous. Then I had in the last issue of Blaise Pascal Magazine created a change tool, a CDS change tool. That is a change tool where you can put in your CDS files and eventually add fields or alter names, etc. in live CDS files. I found that very handsome, and I want to do the same for that with the KBM memtable, and I will try to have that by then available. That won't be any problem, I suppose. And then we will create a fast report in Lazarus. Design time and so you can see what is going on, etc. And there will be an invoice program that I created. That's about the program we are going to bring on those 2 days. And in between the sessions, we will have free lemonade and coffee and stuff like that. You have to pay entrance, of course. And there will be something for, what's it called? We have a lunch, and most people do know that I'm very careful about creating lunch things, so they will know what I will create.
Sounds like a busy schedule with a lot of interesting things going on there, Detlef.
Yeah, I hope it is, and it must be, because this is the first starting program of the Lazarus Factory, and the Lazarus Factory wants to make a professional service for anybody that needs to be supported for Lazarus. What I want to do, and I don't know if we have time for that, but I want to do that second day as well, is to make a session about how to convert your Delphi program into Lazarus.
That would be of interest, I think, to many people.
Yeah, it's not as difficult as you think. And by now we have almost finalized generics for Lazarus, Pasteur.js, and by that time WebAssembly will be completed. So I think we have everything you could imagine to be needed in that language, and I think you could do anything with Lazarus by that time. Well, that was what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you, Detlef, for a nice presentation. I think that's going to be of interest to see what's going on with Lazarus in the future. It's been a long while, been a long birth. It's been living for quite a while, but you know, I've had my issues, you know, as you know, moving to Lazarus with my middleware, because somehow Embarcadero, they have always figured out some new nice features that I like to use in my middleware, which Lazarus didn't support. But it seems that the most of the features are getting there now, so that's quite cool.
Yeah, absolutely. We added attributes, we added the RTTI, stuff like that. It's all done now. It's on the test, of course, and well, one of the main things in Lazarus, especially Lazarus, is now that we want to be better than any other Pascal language, simply because we know that, as an example, in Delphi, the generics are not done in the way they should have been done. And the problem is that you have an FPC generics, you have a Delphi generics, you have a Pasteur.js generics. And what we try to do is make it all compatible with each other. And that is really complex. It really is. But anyway, we will succeed in that. And I think for the future, anything you can do in Delphi, you can do in Lazarus. But anything you can do in Lazarus, you won't be able to do in Delphi. That's it for now. As far as I can help people to have extra information, please go to the website or send me a email, so then they can ask for information and I'll simply send that.
Thank you, Detlef.
Okay.
So I will continue the session, and what I promised was to show something about SmartBinding. I know there has been coming a lot of other requests for other things, and I'll see if we can get some of those in later on. Not today, because I haven't prepared for that. I know there has been requests from people also to see if we can get RAD server shown, how that works, and we'll see if I know that next time we'll have Jim McKeith in showing something, and we'll see if that will be one of his presentations.
Yeah.
So, okay, I will go on and share my screen here. And I'll remove this one. So what I'm going to show now is something about SmartBinding.
Okay.
What is SmartBinding? SmartBinding is, well, you know, probably have heard, well, you have heard about data source and data sets and how you can bind data controls to those in the good old days since I think Delphi 3 was coming out, and has been working very, very well. It's been a very nice way to bind something holding data together with something that is presented on the screen. Unfortunately, time kind of ran out from that kind of setup, because it was only centered around binding data sets. Later on, back in, I think it was in XE2, or was it XE, live binding was introduced by Embarcadero. So it's quite some releases ago. And live binding was seen as the new magical bullet for making any kind of binding between any kind of data source and any kind of recipient of any kind of data. And it's not data sources only, but anything could be a data source basically in live binding. That was how it was sold to us users afterwards. And it looked good. Live binding does look good. It has a nice editor. No, I'm not going to show live binding here because I think that's for somebody else to do. But it does have some serious flaws also, in my opinion, because it's at the moment that you actually want to do something in code to do with live binding, then it's suddenly getting very difficult to use. And the moment that you are doing something in the designer of live binding, and that something incorporates quite a lot of fields, quite a lot of data, quite a lot of bindings, then the designer is getting very slow. This is something I've been complaining about several times to them directly, and I think they have been working on some performance improvements in that lately. So there might be some coming out in an update for Delphi 10.3 later on that might address that. I'm not sure. Something has been hinted to me that could happen, which is long due in my opinion. Anyway, another problem about live binding is that it's binding basically either by complex code or by using an IDE or a graphical editor. And that graphical editor, the binding you're doing there, is actually being put into properties of components and some external VB something binding file. And that means it's getting quite difficult to refactor stuff. If you have something on one form that is bound together and you want to move it to another form, you cannot just copy and paste it to the other form, or cut and paste it to another form. Then you lose all the live binding. In fact, you can cause quite a lot of problems with that. And all the nice things you have set up with conversions and edits should be tested for whatever is put into them, reformatted before some destination is receiving the data. All those changes that have been lost in that transition the moment you cut and paste and copy and paste something. So that's not really nice either. Next thing about live binding is that it has problems when you are doing cyclic bindings, which means that if something is binding to something else that is binding magically some way back to the first component or the first source of entry of data, then you might actually ending up in getting an unlimited recursive situation where your application will stall, and you'll run out of stack at some point, and your application will crash. That's not really nice, and it can be quite difficult to figure out when you have a complex application, figuring out which event is causing all this havoc, and that's a design error in my opinion in how live binding is working. But it's the reason why it's doing like that is because live binding is working directly with events. It's acting directly on events, and it's running code directly the moment an event is happening. In synchronous together with clicking, for example, on the button, then the code that has been attached to that live binding to that button will be executed. And that could cause all these kind of problems. So I invented SmartBinding. Actually, I'm always on some projects, and I was doing a project, quite complex project where I was using live binding and using FireMonkey, and it was going well for a time, and then suddenly I start to realize all the issues I've been telling you about here. And at some point I decided, okay, this is not the way I'm going to do it for my next project, because it's getting troublesome and it's getting difficult to handle this this application in the moment I'm going to refactor something, the moment I'm going to support something else. It's too brittle. It's easy to get to break, and it's difficult for me to see where are all the bindings actually happening. Is something missing? Is everything there? Has something gone missing because I suddenly cut something out and then perhaps decide to paste it in again afterwards because it was a mistake, I cut it out? Well, then your live binding is gone also. So these things are making it difficult to use live binding, in my opinion. So SmartBinding came along as a concept, and later on I released it together with the middleware. So it's simply bundled with the middleware. And you can use it for binding just about any kind of stuff. And I will tell a little bit about how it's working internally later. But right now I'll just show how it works, how you're actually doing the binding. And we can try to run this simple sample first. It's from the first live binding version. I was preparing this sample, and we have a second live binding version. And actually there's coming, I'm working on something new also that I'm going to use, which is smart events, because we have the problems with events also. When you're clicking something, you want something to happen, and I want it to be loosely bound, so it's easy to manage afterwards. I might show something about that in a moment. I'm not exactly sure. It's the state of the code is not that good at the moment. But let's see. We prepared a simple sample here, and the moment I click this prepare simple, I asked the SmartBinding to set up a few bindings for me. And right now I've told it to bind this memo to this label and to this edit field and to that edit field and to the caption of this button. So if I'm typing something here, stuff will be updated immediately. I've also made some other bindings, so if I'm changing some things in here, then other things are changed. We'll see at the moment what bindings I've made, but you can see if I'm typing here, then it's actually changing something here, and it's changing down something in the next edit, and also in the button down here, but not in the memo. We see you, not Delphi. That's really stupid. Then I should, of course, share my screen. I did share my screen, didn't I? That could be because I'm running in a VM, perhaps. So you can run Unity instead. That's funny. Share screen. Somebody seeing me or seeing my screen right now? Okay, somebody seeing my screen. That's cool. So I'm not that nice a person to look at, so it's more fun to look at my screen. Okay, we'll try again, and I will just start this again. Let's see if we can get this stuff. Oh, it's filling up my screen on top, doesn't matter. Oops. I'll move that down there. I have you might not see what I'm moving around, but it's just some console for this Zoom thing that we're using for presenting and doing this webcast. Anyway, let's run it again. And if I'm saying prepare simple, we have the memo, and we can see the memo is the text in the memo is being shown in the button and so forth. As I told before, if I'm changing something in here, it's automatically updating the other controls as it's been told to do. But if I'm changing something down here, then you can see the memo is not updated. It's still the same thing, and that's because what we're seeing is that something are two-way binding and something is one-way binding. And I'll show how that works. So we'll prepare simple. What we'll do is to make this binding work is just what's down here, what's happening down here. I'm clearing the bindings, and you'll probably wonder where that one is coming from. The moment that you're including SmartBinding in your project, the unit called SmartBind, KBMW SmartBind, then you'll have access to a global instance called binding, and you can use that immediately. And that is usually enough for making all the bindings you need. If you want to have more control, you can actually make your own instances of SmartBinding binding engines, and you can have more of those running if you want to, but usually it's enough with the one. And I'm just saying clear, which means that I'm clearing all existing bindings just in case some other demo has been run. So there's no bindings active after the clear. Then I'm doing a bind, and I'm saying I want to bind my edit one, the text property of that one, to the label one caption property. That's quite easy. The next one I'm doing the same, edit one text button, but to the button's caption. And from edit one text to edit two dot text, but this one should be two-way. That means that if I'm changing edit one, edit two should be updated, and if I'm changing edit two, the text property, then edit one should be updated. And that's the reason why when we're running, you could see that when I'm changing in either edit one or edit two, then you will see the stuff is getting updated anyway. If I'm typing up here, oops, I have to prepare it. We'll see everything is getting updated. If I'm typing down here, then everything is getting updated too. And why is that? Well, I'm typing edit two, that's the one down here. And that one is two-way bound to edit one, which is up here. And edit one is bound to this up here, to this label, and is bound to this caption of the button. So that means that we have a cascading event that's happening. The edit two change updates the edit one, which updates the rest of the buttons. So we have an example, whoops, and a memory leak. That's because I was doing something before and not clearing it out. Well, we'll see what that was. Anyway, next thing I'm binding to is I'm saying that I also want to bind memo1.text to some data. And where is that data defined? Well, I have a global, well, not a global, but a private, but always available record. I think it is T-data. I think it's a record. Let's see, yeah, it's a record with data one and data two as strings in it. And go back. Come on, back to that. So I'm binding the memo1 to the record instance, and I'm binding it to the field in the record called fdata1. And then I'm also making sure, just for the fun of it, to bind from the record the field fdata1 to the edit2 text field. So it's a mix of bindings, but it's just showing how you can easily bind stuff together, and even binding to ordinary data. The only thing that you have to remember is that you know, that data cannot just disappear in the middle of anything. You cannot just have the record go out of scope, or if it would be a class instance, that class cannot just be freed, because then you will have problems. But there are ways around that, and I'll show that in a moment. And now I'm just presenting something, and my wife, she's looking at me from an angle, and that's as it's disturbing a little bit because I know she's probably saying something to me that I cannot hear right now. But that's how it goes. Anyway, that was the simple binding. Of course, when we're binding something, then we also want to unbind stuff at times. In this case, for example, we can click on this button, and then we can say unbind source edit 1. That means all the bindings where edit 1 was participating as a source will be removed. So there will be no bindings anymore where when you're changing edit 1, then other things will be updated. And the same, we can do an unbind destination, and then of course we will remove edit 2 as a destination. So changing stuff in other things will never update edit 2 anymore. And obviously we have one that's just called unbind, which is removing edit 1 from binding to anything. And the same with edit 2 or something else. And remember I told you that the record shouldn't just disappear in the middle of everything without telling the SmartBinding system. And that's what you can see here. In this case, we have a data 2, which was the same type as the other data. You see data here and data 2 here was both of T data type. Now we're preparing a data 2 with some data, and then we are saying to the binding system, rebind what we were binding before. Everything that was looking at data should now be looking at data 2 and update data 2. And all this is safe to do. That will be it's an easy way to switch something out without nasty stuff happening. Okay, and let's look at the next tab of the demo. Because of course, when you're binding to something, right now we just bound simple properties together, which is cool enough, but you'll probably also like to bind to lists of data or data sets and stuff like that. In this case, I'm preparing to bind to a list. So we click that one, and we'll see that it's written Hans, and Hans wrote, or Hans way here, and Hans once more, and we can click next, and we'll see that it will move between the different entries we have already prepared. And I'll show how those entries have been prepared. I do not like to have a memory leak. I have to look at it. That was probably something I've been fooling around with in my event creation stuff. Anyway, we are clearing the bindings. That one up here, I will explain that later what that is in a moment, but right now ignore it. We're clearing the bindings. Then I'm making sure to create a lines object, and the lines object is just an object list of tline, and tline are instance or class containing a name and address. So that's quite easy way to make a list. And we add a couple of lines to that lines list. Hans and Hans way, and Jens and Jens way, and so forth. And then we're binding edit3.text. Let's see what we have on the screen. Edit3, that's this one, .text. We are binding that to label2.caption just for the fun of it. Label 2 is that one up here. And edit3.text to button2.caption just for the fun of it. And then finally also we are binding memo2.text to button2.caption. That means this one changing this one will also change the button's caption down here. So we have two different controls that can change the contents of that button. And that's okay, there's no problem, you can do that. And we have the same binding to some record of some kind, just to show that we're just building on the simple binding before. Then the next thing is the funny part. Right now we are binding lines, that's the object list. We are binding its property called name to the edit3.text property. And then we are making a binding from the object list to address, the address field to edit4.text. And that's the reason that we see the name and the address in these two, controls. This part here is something that will make it able for you, enable you to do to use a navigator the same way as you're used to do with a data set. Because, well, every binding is returning every time we call .bind, then it's returning a bind interface. And that bind interface contains different things. But one of the more interesting things that it contains is a navigator. And if there's a navigator there, that means if it's not nil, then we can use its properties first, next, the methods first, next, and so forth. We can take bookmarks and go to bookmarks and figure out where we are and do some other things on that navigator. Which brings us down to the buttons down here. First, well, it's just simply checking do we have a binding defined, a binding interface. And the binding interface, remember we got that returned just a moment ago when we prepared the list. It was returned there. And that one binding is a IAK-BMW binding interface. So we're just asking if we have one of those, and if there's a navigator on it, then we will click, when people are clicking on the first button, then it will go to the first entry on the list, or whatever the navigator is navigating. And previous and next and last is the same thing. So that's the reason why it works as it does. Prepare list, and we'll say next, 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 previous, and we'll see that it will do as we asked it to. Last, first. And then I'm cheating just to get rid of that annoying memory leak, which I do not like to show. Okay, so we can bind to a list, but what about binding to datasets? Because datasets are not disappeared. We're still using datasets a lot in Delphi, and this dataset is quite nice to use. The mem table is quite nice to use, and the middleware is using datasets and supporting datasets quite extensively. So why not be able to bind with those also? Of course, we can do that. And we prepare a dataset, in this case, a mem table. Load some data from it from a biolife.csv file. And then we say that this dataset is the one we're going to bind to. So we are saying binding, bind the dataset, the field in the dataset to which control or property you want to bind it to. And in this case, we also bound the two-way, which means that if you're changing data, if you're editing something in edit5.txt, means typing something in the edit field, then it will also be updated in the category dataset, in the category field in the dataset for a current record. And in this case, we have put a little bit extra on it. We have also given it a name, this binding, so we can use that name later on if we want to disable a binding or remove a binding and stuff like this. We can use a specific binding instead of holding onto the binding instance. And so forth. We have a species name, common name we're binding to. In this case, we're binding again to from the dataset to a record. We are binding from a dataset species name to a combo box items. And that's another one. If we have a combo box over here, which means that this combo box we would like to have to show all the items already in the dataset. All the species names available in the dataset should be shown in that combo box. Next thing we are saying is that we are binding at the at sign. That's a special character that is identifying the position. So we're binding the position of the dataset to the item index of the combo box, which means, and we're also by the way doing that two-way, which means that the moment we are changing current record in the dataset, then we will also see that it's changing the current record or the value of the species name in the combo box. And if we're changing something in the combo box, selecting another item in the combo box, then we will also see the dataset is updated automatically to show that record. The same with the list box, and we are doing a binding also on that one two-way for the position. And let's try to run that one. So prepare dataset, and we have the triggerfish and some other stuff we bound to here, and we can see the long the list box here, and we can see the combo box here. We can try to change something, and we'll see everything update automatically. Even that is more difficult to do in live binding. So, and we'll probably end up in recursive problems right now if we're trying to do this in live binding. So it will be stack overflow and a crash. Okay, let's try to look at the next thing we can bind to, because if you have binding and you also want to bind to a grid. And in this case, we are preparing the dataset again, loading in something in from BioLife, and then we are saying we want to bind this BioLife to a string grid. It's just a regular string grid. This time we're saying we want to bind category, the field category in the dataset, to the column number 1 of the string grid. And column number 2. And again, we have the @ sign, which means we are binding the dataset's position to the string grid's position. And it should be 2 ways. So the moment we're changing position in string grid, it will be updated in the dataset. Current record on dataset will be repositioned, and vice versa. And then we also want to have the position from the dataset presented as the first column. So it will be a value shown in the string grid for which position of the dataset it is. Finally, we are binding LE. That's this one, the label edit. It's a text box to the string grid 1 row count. So we can actually change the number of rows shown on the fly. Well, let's see how that goes. And we'll see prepare dataset. And we got data here, and we can move around here within them. And we can say next down here. And you will see the little scroll just as we're used to, even though it's just a simple string grid. We jump to the last one, to the first one. And we can try to change this one to 15, for example. And then suddenly we have 15 rows, including the fixed row on the top. Okay. In SmartBinding version 2, which is the current version, it's possible to bind in different ways. You can bind to rows also, not only columns, but also to rows. So you can actually make a horizontal scrolling grid if you want to. You can bind to single specific cells within a grid, so you can actually make a spreadsheet and stuff like that easily. Okay, the next one is a performance thing. It's mostly there to show that it's able to update and perform quite well. I can see there's a chat here. Well, I can't see the chat, but I can see there is a chat. Yeah, there's a question. What's the question, Benno? Okay, so the binding, Benno is asking, the binding instance is a global instance. So how does it handle stuff in different forms? Well, as long as you have the different forms instantiated, you can bind between them. If you want to shut down a form, then you need to unbind the stuff on that form. So that's yeah, you have 2 forms. I understand that, and you have stuff in one form and stuff in another form. Okay, they both have an edit 1. It doesn't matter because it's not binding on to the name of edit 1. It's binding to the instance of edit 1. So that means there will not be problems about the distinguishing between them. Okay. The performance here, well, let's test performance. Let's see what that does. It creates 1,000 controls dynamically, a lot of edit controls, and it's updating those edit controls. Well, it's doing a lot of stuff here, but basically it's just trying to figure out, does it work? Can we update 1,000 controls at one single time and bind 1,000 controls without any performance problems? And of course we can do that. So we have 1,000 controls here, and you can see that it's updating, and we can see down here how long time it's actually taken to update. It's taking 1 to 2 milliseconds to update all 1,000 controls. So it's going quite fast. And when it's been doing that for a short while, it will get rid of all the controls again. And so it did. Another thing we can do is we can bind to functions. Let's say we want to bind 87.text to every time. So every time that somebody types something in 87.txt, then there will be logged something somewhere, and we can do that like this, binding using an anonymous function. So the moment we type something at 87, then we'll be using KBMW's logging function to debug, make a debug log that something happened. We can also, in this case, say that, okay, we are going to call a function to be able to populate something. So in this case, we have a function here, an anonymous function that has been used as the source for data, and it's been put into the caption called text in edit 8. And in this case, it's a random value, and the result is returning true. That means that a value was available. If result is returning false, then it means that no value was available in this case, and they will not try to update other depending things. And in this case, we are trying to populate edit 9, and at the same time, we are saying that the moment that we are getting some data, we want to update its, we want to convert it using an expression. For example, in this case, we wanted to write hello in front of the whatever data has been returned, and the data that's been returned is some kind of random value. So edit9.txt will contain hello and then some random value. We can try to see what happens when we run that. And that's what's happening there. And 87, well, if the moment we're typing something at 87, tick, 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 we can see there's something down here, got a change from binding to 87, and it's been locked down here. And we see hello, something changing, and a random value here changing. So that's quite easy also. And the question is, okay, to destination expression, that of course asks the question, is there something called to source expression? Yeah, there's something called to source expression. That means that you can also convert data back. If you have a two-way conversion, for example, a two-way binding, and you want to convert something in one way, then you might also want to be able to convert the way back the moment you're typing something in the second control. So of course there's a two-way expression reformatting. This expression thing is actually using KBM Memtable's SQL parser, which has been used all over in the middleware for handling mathematical and string-based expressions, and it contains a lot of functionality, including string functions and math functions and a lot of other funny things in there. So you can do mid and left and right and regular expressions and stuff like that. Okay. And we have a different expression binding here. And that's what I was talking about, the two-way binding. We have a to-destination expression and we have a to-source expression. So the moment we're typing something in one field, then we are prepending hello before it's been put into the second edit field, the second edit control. And the moment that we are changing something in the second edit control, then we are removing the first 7 characters. So we are getting only the first, the last, whatever remaining characters back to the edit 1 text. Let's try to see how that goes. Prepare binding. And I'm writing something in this one up here. And we can see hello, something down there. Hello, Kim. If I'm writing down something down here, it's writing hello, Kim Madsen down here, but it will write Kim Madsen only up there in the top field, in the top edit box. So easy to bind and do quite advanced stuff. And it's easy to refactor because all this stuff, you can just copy or paste it and cut and paste together with whatever functionality you want to move around. Nobody says you have to have all your bindings put around in your source code everywhere. You can choose to put it one place. It's up to how you want to arrange it, but I'll show something for the version 2 binding that makes things easier. So that was version 1 binding, and let's try to look at version 2 binding. Nope, don't want to save. Now we have something called simple design time binding. And what is that? Well, next logical step after being able to write some code in runtime to do the binding would be, of course, to do something at design time, which is still refactorable, which means that it will move along together with your controls. If you are cutting or copying or whatever your control, then the binding will move along together with it. And one way to do that, well, actually the only way really to do that without employing weird editors and external stuff, which makes it not refactorable easy suddenly, is to actually use some of the strings the string properties that are available on most controls. In this case, we have one edit control called edit3, and we have another one which is actually edit4. And we can see the caption of edit4 has some funny text in it. You can see down here. It's saying it's a curly parenthesis, and it's saying edit3.text and saying two-way true. So what's going on here? And we have a label here where there's something also with curly parentheses, and a button here where we have something with curly parentheses. Let's see what happened when we are just running this. Okay, what's happened when I'm typing something here? Ah, it suddenly binds something together. Okay, so it means that we have told the system by just updating a string that we want the contents of edit4 to be of this particular property of edit4 to contain what is in edit3.text. And we want it to be two-way, so we can, as we saw before, can type something in here and then we'll update edit3 also. So that's quite easy. We didn't even really prepare anything. We just put some text in here. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because it could be that you had some controls where curly parentheses are really there, and they shouldn't really mean that you're binding to something else. So what's happening behind the scene? Well, the moment I'm running this application, I have probably have to find the form first. I have a form create event here, which is setting up, setting up a lot of stuff. But what it's also doing is further down here, where is it? Is doing an auto bind on self, and self in this case is the form. So in this case, I'm saying to the smart binding system that I want the smart binding system to find all the stuff on my form that has been defined as to be bound design time. And then it's doing the stuff for you. So it's taking everything in this form, all the tabs and everything, and figuring out, okay, what should be bound together. Okay, let's try to look at multi-binding. For example, this caption down here, well, if you really want, it's not a really nice way to bind something, and you cannot see what's written on the button at the moment, because we've changed to a binding syntax. So how do we avoid having to do that? Because actually, perhaps we want that button to have a caption called run, which shouldn't be bound to anything. Well, we can use multi-binding for that. We can choose a different control and use any string property on that one control to define all the bindings for other controls on the same form. And in this case, we have a button, perhaps a poor choice of example, but well, that was what was used, where we have put in, I will probably put a notepad up so you can better see it. We'll put in this text. And as you can see, it's JavaScript actually. And actually it's not JavaScript, it's YAML, but they are very close to each other, JavaScript and YAML. But it's an array of bindings that consists of this and that and that. So we have 3 bindings defined in here. The first one binding actually just tells the smart binding that we want the value of this particular property to hold the text button the moment we're starting up, because right now it contains a YAML or a JavaScript looking thing, and we want it to contain the text button when it's starting up. So that's what we're saying here. Next thing is that we're saying, but apart from that, we want to bind edit1.text to label2.caption, and we want to bind edit1.text to label 1.caption. So we can have multiple bindings defined in one string, and everything will just happen automatically when we run it. And we can see we have the application down here. Multi-binding is down here. We can see the button is actually having a caption button, and the moment we are changing something here, we are seeing that in the case up here, we are updating both those labels as we bound to. Okay. Then we have grid row binding. I told before that we could bind to grids as a normal grid where you have a lot of columns with fields in them, or you can bind objects or object lists, whatever, to a grid. In this case, we are also binding the other way around. So we are saying that we want our list to go horizontally. So we are saying next, next, next. We can actually see that it's scrolling horizontally instead. And what it has bound to is, we can see down here the binding text. I'll probably look at it a little bigger text here, so it's easier to see. Like that. There's also an array of bindings. We are binding test2 and test2. Well, that's a funny syntax here. Test2 is actually a placeholder for some data. I haven't told about that yet, but in version 2 of SmartBinding, we can have data placeholders, which means that we're not necessarily binding to real data. We are binding to a placeholder of data. And that means you can actually switch your data out for something else. If at one moment you want to run against, for example, an Oracle database, and you have controls which are not controls, but datasets which are specific Oracle dataset controls, well, then you can proxy those by this SmartBinding stuff and call them, for example, test2, this dataset. Well, not the dataset itself, but the proxy. And at some point, you want to switch that dataset out with an object list containing objects with data instead. Then you just tell the SmartBinding system to switch the data source to something else. I'll show that how that goes on. But right now we just ignore that, and we just think that this is a dataset or something. Anyway, we're binding its position to the string grid's position, and it's two-way, and we are binding the value 1. Value of the proxy of the dataset, let's just call it that, to the string grid 2, and then we are suddenly having instead of just a normal column name, we have a dot, so we can say .2, which means that we are binding to row 2 in this case. And the next thing people could ask for, what if we are saying like this, binding to 4.2? Well, that means actually we are binding to a specific cell in the dataset. So it's possible to index anything in the grid that way. Okay. And I think there is a cell binding example over here, which is doing exactly that, and is showing how to bind different things to actually make a spreadsheet. So it's bound to a specific cell. It's bound to another cell. And edit 7 is bound, so it's written something, and hello in the end of it. We could have bound something else. We could have bound, for example, edit 7, and then say it should be edit 5 plus edit 6. Let's try to look at the binding. Instead, just we're saying it. Yeah, I'll show that in a different place, because I've forgotten the syntax myself. I'll find that in a moment. I'll just close and reopen because I don't want to save the change here. Okay, I'll come back to that in a moment. Binding separation 1. Well, binding separation was what I talked about before with proxies. Let's say we have some labels down here. This one label is bound design time to a proxy called test to its property called value2. So let's try to see how that works. We have some test data. The t-test is an instance that we are creating, and let's see what t-test contains. Probably been faster to search for it. Sometimes it's taking a long time for Delphi to do a control click on something to find it. That is, see, t-test is a class that contains some private fields which are published or made available through some properties. In this case, it's nullable types, which means that they can have the value null also. And actually, they also can have a value if indicating if it's been changed or not since last time it's been cleared. So, but the idea is that we have some integers, some doubles, some strings, whatever, and those are the ones that we want to present to the user. It could be a name, address to, zip code, and so forth. But right now it's just some values. So this is a placeholder for data. Then we are telling the binding system that we should define this data with a name. So we call it test. So that's just done as this, which means that we have told the system that the moment somebody is referring to the proxy called test, then it means that we actually want to get the data from this if test data instance. And let's see what happened. Actually, we can see there's something data coming already, and that's because there was already made a placeholder called test beforehand. I didn't show that. But the moment that we redefine the test data, then suddenly something else will be put in there. And that something else will be whatever has been put into the instance of that that test data in the instance I showed just a moment ago. I'll show where that's defined. Test data. T-test create. We have a constructor on that one, and we are setting its values here. That was the reason that those values were shown the moment we clicked the button. But what was it showing before when we ran it? Let's just run it, and we can see there's some funny values going on here. And something must be happening already. I'm sure it is. That's because I've already made a proxy from start. And the proxy is somewhere defined somewhere down here. You see there's a defined data here called test. And that one is referring to data, and that data is a binding data generator. And you can see the properties value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, just like we have in the test data instance. They're available here also. We're saying value 1 should just have the value of 10. Value 2, the property called value 2, should just have the string ABC. Value 3 should have the floating point value 88.4. Value 4, well, that is a funny one, because firstly we are saying that this one is to be known in the future. You know, the scope is this, this what we're writing here, but within this scope it should be known as random. So the moment we are referring to this random, then these settings that is defined here will be used. And we are saying that we want type 4 to be produced as a number. We want it to be random. We want the minimum number to be 10,000 and the maximum number to be 100,000. And we want to come in steps of 5 and an interval of 250 milliseconds that they should change. So what does that mean? That means that it's actually every 250 milliseconds generating automatically a new value for value 4, the property value 4. And then we're saying that value 5 and value 6 and value 7, those properties, they should also be random numbers because they should use the same random as up here. That's been defined up here. Value 8 is a bit differently defined. We have told value 8 should be something of values type. It should be random, which means that it's picking one of the values at random, and the values that it's returning for value 8 is either AAA, BBB, CCC, DDD, or EEE. So that way, that's the reason why we are seeing different text values in value 8, the label down here. Okay. And we can try to look at binding separation 2. Let's see what that does. Run that. We have something high, 1 dot and 1.1. Although something happens to you type here, we'll see that I don't think something has been defined. No, but we're redefining test2.data, and then we suddenly can scroll through it. So the data that we have a proxy for is just showing that data we have a proxy for can be a data set or something else that can be having multiple values or multiple rows. We can scroll between those. So that's a nice way to be able to separate data. You can create test data easily, and then you can have a designer sitting and designing your application, doing everything that you need to do, having test data for everything that that designer needs to have running. And then the moment the designer is done with stuff and everything looks nice and all the bindings and everything internally looks nice, then you can actually switch in a real database and see how that runs on a real database just by redefining that proxy. Okay. And then you can save and load bindings. You can take all those bindings and, for example, save it to a JSON file, and you can take that JSON file and load in and load all your bindings again in. So it means you can actually sit and edit all the bindings separately, or you can have a compare them using Beyond Compare or some other nice diff tool to see what's the difference between bindings of that version and this version. Well, it's a live tool, so you can actually work on it live that way. Okay, I think I'll stop at this point because we already quite an hour over the normal scheduled time. That's usually how it goes when we're in good company. But I think that will be what I'm showing now. And later on, I will probably come and show something about the new event system. It's not really ready yet. Well, I can just show it a little bit, just to tease it. Nope. Simple thing. We have a event. We click on the button. The moment we click on the button, we notify with a string and with some text. And then I have a function up here, or not a function, well, it's a local method. And I've said that method is now subscribing for that button, that text called button 1. It could be anything. It could have been Kim here, for example. And if I've been notifying Kim about something, then this method would be running. And it would be running synchronized, which means that it will be running within the main GUI thread. So it could actually update stuff like we're doing down here, or show something in VCL like a dialogue immediately. I won't go into details about this, but I can say that these subjects, as they are called, they are following the middleware's subjects, which means that you can have subjects called something like that, separated by a dot. For example, like that. And you can subscribe on, in this case, just news, like that. Then we'll, oh, well, I should probably type it right. Then it means that button pressed will be called every single time somebody is notifying something with news dot something. So that's it's following the normal middleware, the normal whip way of doing messaging, but it's not using the whip internally for doing messaging. It's doing this in a way different way, which means that it's very fast, and it's not only fast, but it's also possible to use it without having all these conflicts of recurrency. If something is notifying something else that is notifying something back again. In the old days with a normal event, then you would have a recurrent event and you have a problem with your stack and a crash again. In this situation, you won't have that. And the good thing is that you don't have to know actually who is subscribing for your stuff. You just notify about something, and then whatever is subscribing on it can do whatever it needs to do. And you can even provide information together with that notification that the recipient can use for the people subscribing, not the people, but the thing subscribing for that data or for that event can use. And not to mention also, you can also put anonymous procedure in here. The complete exact syntax is still being worked on, but that means that the moment that all that has been subscribing for this notification or parts of the notification they have run, then you'll be notified. Then you'll get your procedure called back that now everything has been done and everybody has been updated, and you even return some data back, whatever has been produced on the way. So it's a different way to bind stuff together event-wise, and it will make a different and a more nice experience when you actually making applications that are going to be responsive and not just run very synchronously within the main VCL thread. Okay, that's what I have to share right now, and thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time in 2 weeks, where it will be Jim from Embarcadero that will have a show, and I do not know what he will show. That will going to be interesting to see. So take care, and bye-bye. Okay, I can see there are, well, I'll just put myself on again for a moment. There are some questions, and one question is, can it cross unit boundaries? Yes, it can. So that's no problem. Can it work between threads? Yes, it can. Of course, the code that you are having inside the threads that you want to have run should be thread safe by itself, but the system itself is both the event handling and the smart binding system is thread safe. Then there's written here, all the demos we have seen available in the current version of the enterprise version 5.09, and I think 90% or 95% of them are available. What is not available is the event stuff, because that's been worked on right now, and I think there are also a few things in the smart binding that are not that I have lying around here. But actually, I think the demos, all of them, they show what's in 5.09 when I'm thinking about it. But there are a few things more in smart binding that I have not shown, which is not released, and that will come in the next release, which I hope will be out soon. But as always, there are things to work on, and yeah, I'll get it done as soon as I possibly can, humanly possibly can. Okay, I'll try to sign off again. Bye-bye.